Hello, wonderful listeners, and welcome to our channel. Settle in, get comfortable, and prepare to be transported to a world of adventure and wonder. If you enjoy our stories, please consider subscribing and letting us know in the comments where you're listening from. Your support means the world to us. And now, let us begin our journey, Lost in the Green, a journey of survival and hope. The world fractured into a kaleidoscope of green and gray. One moment, Alara Vance was meticulously charting the unique flora of the Amazon basin from the small, twin-engine Cessna, her heart thrumming with the quiet joy of discovery. The next, a violent shudder ripped through the aircraft, followed by a guttural cough from the engine that sent a jolt of ice through her veins. The pilot, a grizzled man named Miguel, wrestled with the controls, his face a mask of grim determination, but it was too late. The jungle, a vast, unbroken carpet of emerald below, rushed up to meet them with terrifying speed. Alara remembered a deafening roar, the sickening crunch of metal tearing through foliage, and then, mercifully, darkness. She awoke to a symphony of alien sounds, the incessant chirping of unseen insects, the distant cry of a bird, and the drip, drip of water. Her head throbbed, a dull, persistent ache that made opening her eyes a monumental effort. When she finally did, a kaleidoscope of vibrant green assaulted her vision. Sunlight, fractured and dappled, struggled to penetrate the dense canopy above, casting the forest floor in an ethereal, shifting glow. Pain flared in her left leg, a sharp, insistent protest, and her arm was scraped raw. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw its way up her throat. She was alone. Miguel was gone. The wreckage of the Cessna lay scattered around her, a twisted monument to their ill-fated journey. A large piece of the fuselage, bent and broken, offered a semblance of shelter. Her backpack, miraculously, lay a few feet away, partially buried under a pile of leaves. With a grunt of effort, Alara pushed herself up, every muscle screaming in protest. Her botanist's eye immediately registered the unfamiliarity of her surroundings. This wasn't the fringe of the Amazon she knew. This was deeper, primordial, untouched. The air hung heavy and humid, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying vegetation. The sheer scale of the wilderness around her was terrifying. An impenetrable wall of green that seemed to swallow all sound, all hope. She was utterly, irrevocably lost, a tiny speck swallowed by an indifferent, majestic giant. Her survival instincts, honed by years of field research, began to stir beneath the fear. She had to move, to assess, to find water. But first, she had to quiet the screaming voice in her head that whispered, "Asterisk, you are alone. You are utterly, hopelessly alone, asterisk." The immediate aftermath of the crash was a blur of pain and primal instinct. Alara's first coherent thought was water. Her throat felt like sandpaper, and the humid air seemed to suck the moisture right out of her. She stumbled through the undergrowth, her injured leg protesting with every step, until she found a small trickling stream. The water was cool and clear, a lifeline in the suffocating heat. She drank deeply, greedily, splashing some over her face and neck, feeling a tiny spark of relief ignite within her. With her thirst somewhat quenched, her mind, still reeling, began to function more clearly. She needed to retrieve whatever she could from the wreckage. The Cessna was a mangled mess of twisted metal and torn fabric, half submerged in a muddy bank. Miguel's body was nowhere to be seen, a horrifying realization that solidified her solitary predicament. The silence, broken only by the incessant buzz of insects and the distant calls of unseen birds, felt deafening. Her backpack was her most precious possession. Inside, she found her field journal, a small first aid kit, a compass, a water filter straw, a high-energy bar, and her trusty multi-tool. Small mercies, but significant. The first aid kit allowed her to clean and bandage her scrapes and the deeper gash on her arm. Her leg, she discovered, was a severe sprain, not a break, but it would make walking agonizing. The compass pointed north, a direction that meant little without a map, but it was a familiar anchor in a world turned upside down. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, painting the canopy in hues of orange and purple, Alara realized the gravity of her situation. She had no idea where she was, how far she was from civilization, or if anyone even knew she was missing. Their flight path had been over one of the most remote, uncharted sections of the Amazon. Rescue could be days, weeks, or even never. She decided to move away from the immediate crash site. The lingering scent of aviation fuel, mixed with the metallic tang of blood, was unsettling. She found a small, relatively flat clearing 100 yards or so deeper into the jungle. Her botanist training kicked in. She identified sturdy, broadleaf plants that could serve as a rudimentary roof and used fallen branches to create a lean-to. It was crude, offering little protection, but it was something. As dusk deepened, the jungle transformed. The daytime chirps gave way to the cacophony of nocturnal life, croaks, rustles, and unidentifiable calls that sent shivers down her spine. The air grew cooler, but the humidity remained oppressive. She huddled under her lean-to, clutching her multi-tool, listening to the symphony of the wild, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Fear, raw and primal, was her constant companion. She was no stranger to discomfort or isolation, but this was different. This was utter desolation. Yet beneath the fear, a stubborn flicker of determination ignited. She was Alara Vance, and she would survive this. The first night was a brutal teacher. Every rustle, every snap of a twig, every distant howl was magnified by the darkness and her acute sense of vulnerability. Sleep was a fleeting luxury, stolen in short, anxious bursts, her senses constantly on high alert. The makeshift lean-to offered little psychological comfort against the vastness of the jungle, which pulsed with an unseen life. She imagined eyes watching her from the shadows, though she knew most jungle creatures were more afraid of her than she of them. Still, the primal fear of the unknown gnawed at her, a constant, low thrum beneath her skin. She longed for the sterile, predictable hum of her city apartment, the gentle rhythm of her research lab, the comforting presence of familiar faces. These flashbacks were a dangerous distraction, pulling her into a spiral of despair that she knew she couldn't afford. With the first hint of dawn, a faint pearly light filtering through the canopy, a different kind of soundscape emerged. The nocturnal symphony gave way to the vibrant chorus of tropical birds, their calls sharp and clear. The fear of the night receded, replaced by the more immediate, tangible challenges of hunger and thirst. Her high-energy bar was a single precious commodity, a mental boost more than a physical one. She needed real food, real sustenance. Her botanist's knowledge, usually a source of intellectual excitement, now became a desperate tool for survival. She began to scan the immediate area, her eyes searching for familiar patterns, edible leaves, or fruit. Every plant became a potential ally or a deadly foe. This wasn't a controlled environment. This was the untamed heart of nature, where a single mistake could be fatal. Her injured leg made foraging a slow, painful process. She limped through the dense undergrowth, carefully avoiding thorns and stinging insects. She found a patch of wild ginger, its roots edible and spicy, a small victory. Further on, she identified a cluster of wild bananas, still green but promising. These small discoveries, these affirmations of her knowledge, brought a surge of hope. She was not entirely hopeless. She had skills, and she had a will to live. As the sun climbed higher, casting the jungle in a sweltering embrace, Alara found a clearer stream, wider and faster flowing than the one near the crash site. She used her water filter straw, savoring the cool, clean water. The sheer relief of it was profound. She spent the rest of the morning refining her shelter, reinforcing the lean-to with more leaves and branches, trying to make it more secure. She gathered dry kindling, hoping to start a fire for warmth and to cook the ginger, but her lighter had been lost in the crash. The lack of fire was a significant drawback, making her feel even more exposed. As the second night approached, Alara felt a different kind of exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that settled in her very soul. She understood now with chilling clarity that this was not a temporary setback. This was a fight for her life, a relentless struggle against an environment that was both beautiful and utterly unforgiving. Day 2 bled into day 3 with a relentless monotony of heat, humidity, and gnawing hunger. Alara's injured leg pulsed with a dull ache, making every step a conscious act of will. Her high-energy bar was long gone, a distant memory of easy calories. Now, her diet consisted solely of the wild ginger she'd defound, and a few handfuls of the unripe wild bananas, which, despite her botanist knowledge, tasted surprisingly bland and fibrous. She knew the importance of variety of protein, but the jungle was a vast, confusing pantry of unknown dangers. Identifying edible plants was a constant mental effort, fraught with the risk of misidentification, a mistake that could prove fatal. Her mind, once a repository of scientific data and complex theories, was now a finely tuned instrument for survival. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every shadow, every scent was scrutinized. She moved slowly, deliberately, her senses heightened. Thirst was less of an issue now that she'd found the clearer stream, but the lack of substantial food was draining her strength. She felt weaker, slower, and the ever-present humidity seemed to sap her energy directly from her bones. The jungle, with its endless shades of green, began to feel less like a vibrant ecosystem and more like an oppressive living wall. The sheer scale of it was disheartening. She tried to climb a few smaller trees, hoping for a vantage point, but the effort was too much for her leg, and the canopy remained an unbroken sea of green. One afternoon, while foraging near a cluster of ancient-looking ferns, a sudden movement startled her. A flash of iridescent blue and green darted across her path, a small, brightly colored snake. Her heart leaped into her throat, a primal scream catching in her chest. She froze, her breath held, watching as the creature, no bigger than her arm, disappeared into the foliage. It was, she knew, likely harmless, perhaps a tree boa or a vine snake, more interested in insects than humans. But in her heightened state, every encounter, no matter how innocuous, felt like a direct threat. This constant state of alert was exhausting, slowly eroding her mental fortitude. She found herself talking to herself, whispering plans, recounting memories, anything to fill the deafening silence of her solitude. Despair was a dangerous adversary, insidious and tempting. It whispered doubts, suggesting that her efforts were futile, that rescue was a fantasy. She fought it with every ounce of her being, clinging to the smallest victories, finding a new source of water, identifying a safe plant, managing another day without succumbing to injury or illness. Her resolve was a fragile flame flickering against the relentless winds of the wilderness. She knew that to give in, even for a moment, was to invite oblivion. Her purpose narrowed to the most basic of needs: survive the current hour, survive the current day. The grand scientific expeditions, the academic accolades, they were all distant echoes now, replaced by the brutal, immediate reality of lost in the green. The stream, small and unassuming, had become Alara's only clear path forward. Her limited supplies and the impenetrable density of the jungle made venturing off a defined course a fool-s errand. Her logic dictated that all streams eventually led to rivers, and rivers, in turn, often led to human settlements or, at the very least, navigable routes. So, with a renewed sense of purpose, she began to follow its winding course, each step a deliberate, painful effort on her sprained leg. The jungle floor was a treacherous tapestry of tangled roots, slick mud, and unseen obstacles. Vines, thick as her arm, snaked across her path, forcing her to either clamber over them or hack through them with her multi-tool. A laborious process that drained her dwindling energy reserves. The air, perpetually thick with humidity, hung heavy, making every breath feel like an effort. The stream itself was a capricious guide. Sometimes it flowed smoothly over moss-covered stones, its gentle gurgle a comforting sound. Other times it narrowed into a torrent, rushing through dark, rocky ravines, forcing her to scramble along the treacherous banks, her hands raw from clutching at slippery roots and wet rocks. She slipped more than once, plunging her injured leg into the cold water, sending fresh waves of pain through her. The constant dampness was a new enemy, making her clothes cling uncomfortably and raising the specter of fungal infections, a genuine concern in such an environment. The sun, when it managed to penetrate the dense canopy, offered only fleeting patches of warmth, quickly swallowed by the overarching coolness of the undergrowth. Days blurred into an indistinguishable cycle of walking, foraging, and attempting to rest. The sounds of the jungle were her only companions. The incessant hum of cicadas, the raucous calls of unseen birds, the rustle of leaves as unseen creatures moved through the foliage. They were a constant, overwhelming symphony that never truly quieted. She tried to identify the calls, to distinguish between a harmless monkey and a potential predator, but her knowledge, so extensive in plant life, felt woefully inadequate for the vast animal kingdom around her. She found herself whispering to the stream, to the trees, to the unseen creatures, a desperate attempt to break the profound silence of her isolation. Just a little further, she'd murmur, just a little further to a wider river, to a sign of life. Her body was a landscape of bruises and cuts, her clothes torn and mud-stained. Her face, once bright with intellectual curiosity, was now gaunt and etched with weariness. Yet a stubborn spark persisted within her. Each step, no matter how small or painful, was an act of defiance against the overwhelming power of the wilderness. The stream, her silent guide, became a symbol of her journey, a thread of hope leading her deeper into the green. But also, she prayed, towards an eventual way out. The sheer beauty of the jungle, with its vibrant orchids clinging to tree trunks and its towering, ancient trees, was a constant, almost mocking presence, a reminder of the indifferent majesty that held her captive. She knew she had to keep moving. To stop was to surrender to the inevitable, and Ilara Vance was not ready to surrender. Just as the relentless monotony of the journey threatened to overwhelm her, Ilara stumbled upon a small miracle. The stream, which had been winding its way through increasingly dense and challenging terrain, suddenly opened into a secluded clearing. Here the canopy thinned, allowing a glorious shaft of sunlight to pierce through and illuminate a serene, crystal-clear pool fed by a gentle waterfall that tumbled over moss-covered rocks. The water was so clear she could see the smooth, colorful stones at the bottom. Around the edges of the pool, vibrant, unfamiliar flora bloomed, their petals a riot of purples, yellows, and deep reds. It was a pocket of untouched paradise, a stark contrast to the oppressive density she had been navigating. Her first instinct was pure, unadulterated relief. She plunged her face into the cool water, drinking deeply, feeling the refreshing chill seep into her very bones. She then stripped off her grimy clothes, carefully washing them in the clean water, and bathed herself, scrubbing away days of dirt and sweat. The sensation of clean skin, even in the heart of the wilderness, was incredibly restorative. As she sat by the pool, letting the sun warm her skin and dry her clothes, she noticed signs of life around the water's edge. Delicate hoof prints, too small for deer but larger than rodents, were pressed into the soft earth. A flash of iridescent blue caught her eye, and she saw a pair of morpho butterflies, their wings like stained glass, flitting gracefully between the exotic flowers. This place felt different, untouched, almost sacred. Her botanist's curiosity, dormant under the more immediate demands of survival, began to reawaken. She carefully examined the surrounding plants, identifying several species she'd only ever seen in textbooks. Among them, she found a small bush laden with ripe, succulent berries, unlike anything she had encountered before. Cautiously remembering her training, she tested a tiny amount, waiting for any adverse reaction. When none came, she ate a few more, savoring their sweet tart flavor. They were a burst of energy, a welcome change from the bland ginger and unripe bananas. This discovery, this small oasis of abundance, brought a profound sense of hope. It was a reminder that even in the most unforgiving environments, life found a way to thrive, and sustenance could be found. As evening approached, she decided to make this clearing her temporary camp. The air here felt lighter, the sounds of the jungle less menacing. She gathered more berries and found some edible roots. For the first time in days, she felt a genuine sense of peace. The glimmer of hope was more than just a fleeting moment. It was a quiet affirmation that she was still capable, still resourceful, and that the jungle, for all its dangers, also held wonders. She lay down under the starlit sky, the canopy above, open enough to reveal a sliver of the glittering cosmos, and for the first time since the crash. She allowed herself the luxury of a full dreamless sleep, wrapped in the comforting embrace of her small hidden paradise. After 2 days of recuperation at the tranquil pool, Alara felt a significant improvement in both her physical and mental state. Her leg, though still sore, was less inflamed, and the fresh fruit had infused her with much-needed energy. But the call of civilization remained, a silent, persistent hum in the back of her mind. She needed to move, to find a way out. Her next plan was audacious and perilous. She would attempt to climb one of the jungle's giants. From the ground, the canopy was an impenetrable ceiling, but from above, she hoped to spot a landmark, a distant river, or even a wisp of smoke that could guide her. She chose an enormous kapok tree, its trunk a colossal pillar soaring towards the sky, its lowest branches beginning an astounding 50 feet up. The climb was grueling. Her multi-tool became a vital aid, its small saw blade helping her clear away some of the thick vines that clung to the trunk. She used her improvised rope, fashioned from salvaged seat belts from the plane wreckage, and strengthened by braiding to secure herself, inching her way up with a slow, deliberate grace born of desperation. The bark was rough against her hands, her muscles screamed in protest, but the vision of an endless green sea, an unblemished horizon, spurred her onward. Higher and higher she went, until the air grew thinner and the sounds of the forest floor became a distant murmur. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she pulled herself onto a sturdy branch, panting, her heart hammering against her ribs. The view that greeted her was both breathtaking and utterly disheartening. Below, the jungle stretched out in every direction, an endless, undulating carpet of vibrant emerald, punctuated by the occasional flash of a bright flower or the glint of sunlight on a distant, hidden watercourse. It was magnificent, overwhelming in its untouched majesty, but there was no sign of human presence, no roads, no clearings, no smoke plumes, no telltale signs of civilization. Just green, infinite green, as far as the eye could see. The sheer scale of the wilderness was a crushing realization, making her feel infinitesimally small, a lost speck in an ocean of life. She spent hours perched there, carefully scanning the horizon, hoping, praying for a sign. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, casting long, dramatic shadows across the canopy. The silence up here was different from the ground, a vast, echoing silence broken only by the whisper of the wind through the leaves and the occasional cry of an eagle circling far above. She felt a profound sense of isolation, but also a strange, quiet awe. This was the world before humanity, pure and untamed. As the last rays of light faded, Casting the jungle into an ethereal twilight, Alara knew she had seen enough. The path forward was not to be found from above. It was to be found within the green itself, on the ground, one painful step at a time. With a heavy heart but a renewed sense of direction, she began her slow, careful descent, the vastness of the jungle now etched irrevocably into her soul. The jungle had been a relentless adversary, but it had also, at times, offered moments of serene beauty. That delicate balance was shattered with the arrival of the storm. It began subtly, a growing darkness on the horizon, a sudden drop in temperature, and an unnerving stillness in the air. Alara, having learned to read the subtle cues of her environment, knew what was coming. She scrambled to reinforce her lean-to, binding branches with vines, trying to create as much protection as possible against the impending deluge. But nothing could have prepared her for the sheer ferocity of a tropical storm. The first drops were like bullets, fat and heavy, quickly turning into a torrential downpour. The wind, which had been a gentle whisper, now roared through the canopy, bending trees at impossible angles. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the jungle in blinding flashes, followed by thunder that vibrated through the very earth, shaking her bones. It was a primal, terrifying display of nature's raw power. The lean-to, so carefully constructed, offered little resistance. Water poured through the gaps, drenching her within minutes. The ground quickly turned to a viscous mud, and the small stream she had been following swelled into a churning, muddy torrent, its roar now competing with the wind and thunder. She huddled, shivering, clutching her few possessions, feeling utterly vulnerable, a tiny, insignificant speck against the wrath of the elements. Fear, cold and absolute, gripped her. This was beyond her control, beyond her skills. The jungle, her captor, was now actively trying to drown her, to crush her, to sweep her away. Branches snapped and crashed around her, the air filled with the scent of wet earth and torn foliage. The storm raged for hours, a relentless assault that tested the very limits of her endurance. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the chaos, focusing on her breath, on the faint flicker of her own will to survive. Thoughts of home, of warmth, of safety flooded her mind, a cruel torment in her current predicament. When the storm finally began to abate, it was with a grudging slowness. The thunder faded into a distant rumble. The lightning flashes became less frequent, and the rain, though still falling, softened to a steady drizzle. Alara emerged from her battered shelter, soaked to the bone, shivering violently, but alive. The jungle around her was transformed. Trees lay uprooted, their massive forms sprawled across the forest floor. The ground was a quagmire, and the air, though still humid, felt strangely cleansed. Her small camp was a mess, her few dry items now sodden. But as she looked at the destruction, a strange sense of calm settled over her. She had faced the storm, and she had endured. It was a testament to her resilience, a brutal reminder of her place in the natural order, but also a quiet victory. She was battered, bruised, and utterly exhausted, but she was still here. The jungle had thrown its worst at her, and she had stood her ground. This trial, she realized, had forged something new within her, an unshakable resolve. The aftermath of the storm left Alara physically and emotionally drained, but paradoxically also strangely invigorated. The raw power of nature had stripped away any lingering illusions of control, leaving her with a stark, undeniable truth. Survival was a moment-to-moment decision, a relentless act of will. With the skies clearing, the jungle slowly began to dry, its vibrant colors intensified by the recent cleansing. Alara, though still aching, felt a shift within her. The initial panic and despair had given way to a more pragmatic, methodical approach to her situation. She was still lost, still alone, but she was also still alive, and that in itself was a triumph. Her first priority was to rebuild her camp. The lean-to was a disaster, so she sought out a more sheltered spot under the protective overhang of a massive, ancient tree whose roots formed a natural alcove. She gathered larger, sturdier fronds and branches, weaving them together with greater care, creating a more robust shelter that offered better protection from both the elements and unseen eyes. This act of creation, of taking control of her immediate environment, was deeply therapeutic. Each knot tied, each branch secured, was a small victory, reinforcing her belief in her own capabilities. She also focused on refining her foraging techniques. The storm had brought down a bounty of fallen fruit, some edible, some not. Her botanist's eye was sharper now, honed by necessity. She discovered a patch of wild papayas, still green but ripening, and a tree laden with starfruit, a tart but refreshing treat. She even managed to find some nutrient-rich grubs in decaying logs, a difficult but necessary addition to her diet, forcing herself to overcome her initial revulsion. She learned to identify the tracks of various animals, not just out of fear, but out of a growing curiosity, a desire to understand the rhythms of this wild world she now inhabited. The jungle was no longer just an enemy. It was a complex living entity, and she was learning its language. Her daily routine became a meditation: wake with the sun, forage, refine the camp, collect water, tend to her injuries, and spend the evenings listening to the jungle, reflecting. She started keeping a mental journal, detailing her observations, her small discoveries, her struggles. It was a way to maintain her sanity, to keep her scientific mind engaged, and to document her journey, however uncertain its end. The profound solitude remained, but it was no longer as terrifying. She found a strange comfort in the constant presence of nature and the knowledge that she was part of something immense and ancient. The fear had not vanished entirely, but it had receded, replaced by a quiet, fierce determination. She was a survivor, and the jungle, in its brutal way, was teaching her how to be. She was rebuilding not just a shelter, but her very spirit, piece by painful piece, under the vast green canopy. Days turned into weeks, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun and the subtle shifts in the jungle's symphony. Alara had established a rhythm, a routine of survival that kept her mind sharp and her body moving. Her sprained leg had healed enough to allow for longer excursions, though she still favored it. It was on one such venture, deeper into a section of the forest she hadn't yet explored, that she stumbled upon something that stopped her dead in her tracks. Partially obscured by a thick curtain of moss and hanging vines, she saw a pattern in the undergrowth, a faint, almost imperceptible depression in the earth, running in a relatively straight line. It wasn't natural. It was a path. Her heart hammered with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. For weeks, she had seen nothing but the raw, untamed wilderness. This was a sign, an undeniable mark of human presence. But whose? And how old was it? The path was narrow, barely wide enough for a single person, and clearly hadn't been used in a very long time. Trees had grown over sections of it, their roots disrupting the original line, but the underlying structure was still visible. It felt ancient, a ghost of a trail whispered through time. Caution warred with an overwhelming sense of hope. This could be her lifeline, a forgotten route out of the green prison. Or it could lead her deeper into unknown dangers. After a moment of deliberation, the yearning for human contact and the possibility of escape won out. She decided to follow it, moving slowly, carefully, her senses on high alert. The path, though overgrown, offered a slightly easier passage than the dense, trackless jungle she had been navigating. As she followed its winding course, she began to notice subtle changes in the vegetation. Certain trees seemed to be arranged in unnatural clusters, and she spotted a few plants that looked vaguely cultivated, though now wild and overgrown. It was as if someone had once tended this forest, shaping it to their needs, then simply vanished. The air grew heavier, a palpable sense of history clinging to the damp leaves. She imagined ancient footsteps treading this very ground, hunters, gatherers, perhaps even spiritual pilgrims. The thought made her feel less alone, connected to a long-lost human story. The path led her deeper into a particularly dense part of the jungle, where the trees grew taller, their canopies forming a cathedral-like arch overhead, plunging the forest floor into perpetual twilight. The sounds of the jungle grew more muted here, a hushed reverence filling the space. She felt an almost spiritual pull, a sense that she was approaching something significant. The ancient path, a fragile thread woven through the fabric of time, was leading her not just through the jungle, but through history itself, towards a destination unknown. But the ancient path continued to draw Alara deeper into the heart of the jungle, each step unveiling more subtle, yet undeniable, signs of a forgotten civilization. The faint depressions in the earth became more defined, hinting at once cleared ground. Then she saw them, not grand structures, but humble, almost camouflaged stones arranged in deliberate patterns. Some formed the remnants of low walls, others were simple, carved blocks that seemed to mark a boundary or a sacred space. They were weathered, covered in moss and lichen, almost fully reclaimed by the jungle, yet their man-made origins were unmistakable. Her heart pounded with a mix of awe and intellectual excitement. This wasn't just a path. It was a ghost of a community, a whisper from a time long past. She knelt, tracing the rough edges of a particularly large stone. On its surface, beneath layers of grime and growth, she discerned faint carvings. They weren't elaborate, but rather stylized figures, swirling lines, abstract shapes, and what looked like simplified depictions of jungle animals, a bird with outstretched wings, a coiled snake, a jaguar. They spoke of a people deeply connected to their environment, expressing their world through art. Who were they? What was their story? And why had they vanished, leaving only these silent echoes? The discovery ignited a different kind of fire within Alara, one that transcended mere survival. Her scientific mind, starved of intellectual stimulation for weeks, reveled in the mystery. She pulled out her field journal, its pages now damp and crinkled, and began to sketch the carvings, taking notes, hypothesizing. This was her element, her passion. For a time, the hunger, the fear, the exhaustion receded, replaced by the thrill of archaeological discovery. She imagined the people who had lived here, their daily lives intertwined with this very jungle, their hands shaping these stones, their voices echoing through these trees. As she explored further, the ancient path led her to a small circular clearing. In its center stood a single, massive stone, taller than Alara herself, intricately carved with symbols that seemed to tell a story, a creation myth, perhaps, or a record of significant events. The air around it felt charged, imbued with centuries of human presence. This was clearly a place of importance, a focal point for the lost civilization. She ran her hand over the cool, smooth stone, feeling a profound connection to the unknown hands that had shaped it. She was no longer just a survivor lost in the wilderness. She was an accidental explorer, a discoverer of forgotten history. The jungle had not just tested her body, but awakened her spirit of inquiry, reminding her that even in the most desolate places, humanity leaves its indelible mark. This ancient place, with its silent stories, had given her a new purpose, a reason to push forward beyond mere self-preservation. The ancient path, now clearly a root of significance, eventually led Alara to the most extraordinary discovery yet. After winding through a particularly dense section of forest, where the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and exotic blossoms, the path opened into a hidden grotto. It was a place of breathtaking, almost ethereal beauty. A natural rock arch, draped with glowing, bioluminescent moss, framed the entrance. Inside, a subterranean spring bubbled up from the earth, forming a perfectly clear, shallow pool that glowed with an otherworldly, soft blue light. The water was so pristine it seemed to shimmer, reflecting the light from unusual, iridescent fungi that clung to the rock walls. Around the pool, the flora was unlike anything Alara had ever seen, even in her extensive botanical studies. Plants with leaves that pulsed with a faint internal light, flowers that unfurled petals of impossible colors, and vines that gracefully cascaded, studded with what looked like tiny living jewels. The air was cool and fresh, devoid of the usual jungle humidity, and filled with a faint, sweet fragrance that was both calming and invigorating. It felt like stepping into a dream, a place of pure magic hidden deep within the earth. This wasn't just a natural wonder. It was a sacred space, a sanctuary. Alara approached the spring with reverence, her usual scientific detachment replaced by a profound sense of awe. She knelt by the glowing pool, dipping her hand into the cool, silken water. It felt alive, pulsing with an almost tangible energy. She drank from it, a strange vitality seemed to flow through her, washing away the lingering fatigue and soreness from her journey. It was more than just hydration. It was a rejuvenation of spirit, a deep cleansing that reached into her very core. The light from the moss and fungi cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an atmosphere of profound peace and ancient wisdom. She imagined the people of the lost civilization coming here, seeking solace, performing rituals, drawing strength from this hidden heart of the jungle. She spent hours in the grotto, simply existing, absorbing the serenity of the place. It was a respite not just from the physical demands of survival, but from the mental burden of her isolation. Here, surrounded by such exquisite beauty and tranquility, she felt a profound connection to something larger than herself, a sense of belonging that had been missing since the crash. The grotto was a testament to the jungle's capacity for wonder, a powerful reminder that even in the most challenging of circumstances, moments of pure, unexpected grace could be found. As she finally prepared to leave, a renewed sense of purpose filled her. The hidden spring had not only healed her body, but had rekindled her hope, urging her to continue her journey, knowing that such wonders still existed, waiting to be discovered. Refreshed and invigorated by the hidden spring, Alara continued along the ancient path, her spirits buoyed by the beauty she had witnessed. The jungle, though still immense and challenging, no longer felt as hostile. She walked with a lighter step, her senses attuned to the subtle movements and sounds around her. It was then that she began to notice a pattern, a quiet presence that seemed to follow her, always just at the periphery of her vision. A rustle in the leaves that sounded too deliberate for a passing breeze, a flash of movement in the dense undergrowth, the feeling of being watched. At first, she attributed it to her heightened senses, a trick of the light, or the natural paranoia of being alone in the wilderness. But the occurrences grew more frequent, more distinct. One afternoon, while resting by a small cascade, she caught a glimpse of golden fur disappearing behind a thicket. Her heart pounded, but it wasn't fear this time. It was curiosity. She knew the jungle was home to jaguars, powerful and elusive predators, but this felt different. There was no aggression, no predatory stealth, just a watchful presence. Later, while meticulously examining a rare orchid, she heard a soft, almost imperceptible huff nearby. Turning slowly, she saw it. Partially hidden by the broad leaves of a giant fern, a creature of breathtaking beauty. It was a large cat indeed, but unlike any jaguar she had ever seen. Its fur was a shimmering, almost iridescent gold, with faint, swirling patterns that seemed to shift with the light. Its eyes, large and intelligent, were the color of molten amber, fixed on her with an intensity that was both unnerving and strangely gentle. It wasn't a threat. It was observing her, studying her with an ancient, knowing gaze. This was no ordinary jungle cat. They remained like that for what felt like an eternity. Two beings from different worlds, sharing a silent moment of mutual observation. Alara, rooted to the spot, felt a profound connection, a recognition of something primal and wise in its eyes. She slowly extended a hand, not to touch, but in a gesture of peace. The creature, without breaking eye contact, slowly blinked, a gesture that seemed almost understanding. Then, with a fluid, silent movement, it turned and melted back into the shadows of the jungle, leaving Alara alone once more, but profoundly changed. The encounter left her shaken, yet filled with a strange sense of wonder. She didn't know what kind of animal it was, or why it had chosen to reveal itself to her. But its presence, its silent companionship, had broken the suffocating solitude of her journey. She felt less alone, less vulnerable. The jungle, which had once felt utterly indifferent, now seemed to hold a secret, a guardian spirit, perhaps. This mysterious creature, her unseen companion, became a symbol of the jungle's deeper magic, a reminder that she was not just surviving, but was also a part of this incredible living tapestry. Its memory infused her with a renewed sense of purpose, urging her forward, not just for survival, but for a deeper understanding of the wild heart of the green. The ancient path continued its gentle descent, and Alara, invigorated by her encounter with the mysterious golden cat, followed it with renewed vigor. The jungle began to shift subtly, the ground becoming softer, the air heavier with the scent of stagnant water. Then, through a final curtain of dense foliage, she saw it, a vast, shimmering expanse of water, stretching far beyond what her eye could perceive. It was a river, much wider and more powerful than any stream she had encountered, its surface reflecting the endless green canopy above. A major tributary, perhaps even the main artery of the Amazon itself. It was a sight that filled her with both immense relief and a daunting new challenge. This was her lifeline, her escape route. Rivers she knew were the highways of the jungle, eventually leading to human settlements, or at least to more frequently traveled areas. But the sheer scale of it was intimidating. The current looked strong, and the banks were steep and muddy in places, making access difficult. She walked along the riverbank for a while, searching for a suitable spot, her mind already racing with plans. Walking further along the bank seemed futile. The river meandered endlessly, and her injured legs still protested against long treks. The only way forward was to travel on the water. The idea of building a raft, however, was overwhelming. She had no tools beyond her multi-tool, no rope beyond the few braided scraps from the plane, and no experience in watercraft construction. But the alternative, remaining indefinitely lost in the green, was unthinkable. Her botanist knowledge once again became her guide. She scanned the surrounding trees, looking for species with buoyant, lightweight wood. She identified several types of palms with broad, sturdy fronds that could be used for lashing, and a particular light-wooded tree that grew abundantly near the water edge. Over the next few days, the riverbank became her new camp and her workshop. The sun beat down relentlessly, the humidity a constant, suffocating blanket. Her body, already pushed to its limits, now faced the arduous task of felling trees and dragging heavy logs. Each branch she cut, each log she wrestled towards the river, was a test of her physical endurance and her sheer willpower. Her hands became calloused and blistered, her muscles screamed with exertion, but she pushed through the pain, fueled by the image of that flowing water carrying her towards salvation. She learned to lash logs together with strong, fibrous vines, testing each knot, making sure it would hold against the relentless current. The river, with its promise of freedom, was also a formidable foe, demanding ingenuity, strength, and unwavering determination. The challenge ahead was immense, but as she looked at the slowly growing shape of her makeshift raft, a flicker of hope ignited within her, a silent promise that she would not be defeated. The process of building the raft was a brutal, relentless test of Alara's physical and mental fortitude. It was far more challenging than she had anticipated. The logs she managed to fell, even the lighter ones, were still incredibly heavy and unwieldy, sinking into the soft, muddy banks with frustrating regularity. Dragging them to the water's edge was an agonizing process, her injured leg protesting with every strained movement. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the air was thick with biting insects, whose stings raised itchy welts on her exposed skin. She worked from dawn till dusk, her body aching, her hands raw and blistered from the rough bark and the constant friction of the vines. Her multi-tool, though invaluable, was a small instrument for such a monumental task. Cutting through thick branches took immense effort and time. Her improvised lashing techniques, while effective, were slow. She learned through trial and error, sometimes watching a perfectly good log slip into the current, or a section of her nascent raft come loose, forcing her to retrieve materials and start over. Frustration, hot and bitter, often threatened to overwhelm her. There were moments of despair when she would collapse on the muddy bank, tears of exhaustion and hopelessness stinging her eyes. Wondering if her efforts were ultimately futile, sleep offered little respite. The sounds of the jungle at night, magnified by her proximity to the vast river, seemed more intense, more menacing. She constantly worried about what creatures might be lurking in the water or along the banks, drawn by her presence. Her food supplies were dwindling again, despite her careful foraging. The energy expenditure of raft building far outstripped her caloric intake, leaving her perpetually hungry and weak. The river, which had initially been a beacon of hope, now seemed to mock her, its powerful current a constant reminder of the immense challenge she faced. Yet, with each passing day, the raft slowly took shape. It was crude, certainly not a masterpiece of naval engineering, but it was robust. She had lashed together 9 buoyant logs, creating a sturdy platform. She then constructed a small raised platform in the center to keep her few belongings dry, and even fashioned a rudimentary paddle from a flat piece of wood and a sturdy branch. The final act was to secure a long, resilient vine as an anchor, tethering the raft to a strong tree on the bank, preventing it from being swept away before she was ready. As she stood back, looking at her creation, a profound sense of accomplishment washed over her, momentarily eclipsing the pain and exhaustion. It was a testament to her unwavering will, a symbol of her refusal to surrender. The river was a dangerous path, but it was a path nonetheless, and she was ready to face its challenges. Her escape was within reach, a fragile promise floating on the turbulent waters. The morning Alara launched her raft was filled with a potent mix of trepidation and exhilaration. The sun, a fiery orb, was just beginning to pierce the eastern canopy, casting long, dramatic shadows across the river. With a final, deep breath, she untethered the vine and pushed her makeshift vessel into the current. The raft lurched, then caught the flow, pulling away from the bank with a surprising swiftness. Alara, clutching her improvised paddle, knelt on the raised platform, watching the bank recede. It was a terrifying, yet liberating moment. She was finally moving, finally making progress. The vast green prison was finally letting her go, or so she hoped. The river was a powerful, unpredictable force. The current, which had seemed manageable from the bank, now felt like a relentless beast, dragging her downstream with alarming speed. She quickly learned that steering with her crude paddle was more about guiding than truly controlling. The raft spun and swayed, often nudged dangerously close to submerged logs or rocky outcrops. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she navigated narrow passages, the roar of the water amplifying her fear. She had to react instinctively, pushing off obstacles, using the paddle to fend off stray branches that threatened to entangle her or capsize the raft. Rapids, which she hadn't anticipated, became sudden, terrifying obstacles. The raft would plunge into churning white water, tossing her violently, drenching her in icy spray. She clung on with all her might, her knuckles white, her muscles screaming, convinced each time that this would be the end. But somehow, miraculously, the sturdy logs held, and she would emerge, gasping for breath, into calmer waters, shaken but unharmed. The constant movement, the ever-changing landscape of the river, was a stark contrast to the slow, painstaking steps she had taken through the jungle floor. She was a passenger now, at the mercy of the river's woe, but at least she was moving forward. As the day wore on, her initial fears slowly began to give way to a strange sense of exhilaration. The river was beautiful, its banks teeming with life she hadn't seen deeper in the forest. Colorful birds soared overhead, their calls echoing across the water. Monkeys chattered from the trees, and she even caught a glimpse of a large capybara bathing lazily on a sandbank. The sheer scale of the wilderness, viewed from the flowing artery of the river, was breathtaking. She was no longer just fighting for survival. She was experiencing the raw, untamed heart of the Amazon, a privilege few would ever know. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the river in a golden glow, Alara tied her raft to a sturdy tree on a small sandy island. Exhausted but triumphant, she settled down for the night, the rhythmic lapping of the water against her raft a comforting lullaby. She had faced the river, and the river was carrying her home. Days blurred on the river, a hypnotic rhythm of water, sun, and jungle. Alara had grown accustomed to the raft's sway, to the constant vigilance required to navigate the currents. Her body, though still lean, felt stronger, more attuned to the demands of her environment. Her senses were sharper, picking up subtle changes in the air, the distant calls of animals, the shift in the river's flow. It was this heightened awareness that made her notice it first, a subtle scent carried on the breeze that was distinctly human. Not the metallic tang of her crashed plane, but the warm, earthy smell of wood smoke. Her heart leaped into her throat, a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. Smoke, it meant people, civilization. After weeks of profound solitude, the idea of human contact was overwhelming, a mix of desperate hope and a strange, almost forgotten fear. She paddled harder, guiding the raft closer to the bank from which the scent emanated. The jungle here seemed to grow even denser, forming a thick, impenetrable wall of green that offered no easy access. She strained her eyes, searching for any break in the foliage, any sign of a clearing or an opening. Then, through a narrow gap in the trees, she caught a fleeting glimpse. Not a village, not yet, but something that confirmed her hope. A small, carefully carved canoe pulled up onto a hidden bank. It was rudimentary, fashioned from a single tree trunk, but undeniably man-made. This was it. She was close. The sight filled her with an almost unbearable mix of excitement and apprehension. Who were these people? Would they be friendly? Hostile? Would they even understand her language? The stories of isolated tribes, both welcoming and wary of outsiders, flashed through her mind. She decided to proceed with extreme caution. She couldn't simply paddle up to their home unannounced. That could be seen as an invasion. Instead, she chose to beach her raft a little further downstream, out of sight, and approach on foot. The ground was still challenging, but the thought of imminent human contact lent her renewed strength. She moved slowly, carefully, pushing through the undergrowth, making sure not to make any sudden movements or loud noises. The sounds of the jungle, once her only companion, now seemed to hold the potential for betrayal, alerting unseen ears to her presence. As she drew closer, the faint sounds of human activity began to reach her. Distant voices, the rhythmic thump of something being pounded, the crackle of a fire. It was the most beautiful symphony she had ever heard. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the emerald world around her. She was on the precipice of something profound, the end of her solitary ordeal, but also the beginning of an unknown interaction. The unseen village, hidden deep within the green, held the key to her future, and Alara, battered but unbowed, was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The journey through the wild had changed her, but it had also brought her to this pivotal moment on the threshold of a new chapter. With her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, Alara pushed through the last curtain of vines and emerged into a small clearing. Before her lay a cluster of meticulously constructed longhouses, built on stilts from local timber and thatched with broad palm leaves. Children's laughter drifted from one of the structures, mingling with the low murmur of adult voices and the crackle of a central fire. It was a vibrant, living village, nestled perfectly within the jungle, a testament to a harmonious existence with nature. Her appearance, however, brought an immediate, stunned silence. A young girl, playing near the edge of the clearing, gasped, pointing a small finger at Alara. Within seconds, all eyes were on her. She stood there, a gaunt, disheveled figure, covered in dirt and scratches, her torn clothes hanging loosely on her frame. Her hair was matted, her face etched with weeks of hardship. She must have looked like a wild apparition. A group of men, armed with long spears and bows, emerged from the longhouses, their faces wary, their stance defensive. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Alara's relief. She slowly raised her hands, palms open, a universal gesture of peace. She spoke, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Hello, I am lost. I mean no harm." Her words, English, were met with blank stares. The language barrier was immediate and absolute. A tall, elderly woman with wise, kind eyes, adorned with intricate facial paint and a necklace of seeds, stepped forward. She was clearly a figure of authority. She spoke in a language Alara didn't understand, her tone questioning but not overtly hostile. Alara, desperate to convey her predicament, pointed to herself, then gestured vaguely into the jungle, mimicking a plane crash with her hands, then miming eating and drinking. The elderly woman observed her for a long moment, her gaze piercing, seeming to see past Alara's ragged appearance into her very soul. Then a slow, gentle smile spread across her face. She turned and spoke to her people, her voice soft but authoritative. The tension in the clearing seemed to ease. The men lowered their weapons slightly, though their vigilance remained. The elderly woman then gestured for Alara to come closer, inviting her into their midst. It was a moment of profound relief, a bridge built across cultures and languages by a simple act of empathy. She was led to the central fire, offered a woven mat to sit on, and then, miraculously, a bowl of warm, fragrant stew and a gourd of fresh water. The food was simple but nourishing, the first truly cooked meal she had eaten in weeks. As she ate, the villagers, cautiously at first, then with growing curiosity, approached her. The children, their initial fear replaced by fascination, peered at her with wide, innocent eyes. Alara, overwhelmed by their unexpected kindness, felt tears stream down her dirty cheeks. She was no longer alone. She was among people, welcomed by a hidden community that had, against all odds, offered her refuge in the heart of the green. This first contact was not just a rescue. It was a profound lesson in humanity, a testament to the universal language of compassion. Alara spent several days in the hidden village, a period of profound healing and cultural immersion. The villagers, members of a tribe she learned was called the Kawanui, people of the deep river, treated her with a gentle generosity that transcended the language barrier. They understood her story not through words, but through her weary eyes, her tattered clothes, and the universal signs of distress. They gave her clean clothes, simple but comfortable, made from woven plant fibers. They tended to her injuries with poultices made from jungle herbs, their knowledge of medicinal plants far surpassing her own. The food, a delicious array of river fish, root vegetables, and exotic fruits, slowly restored her strength. She spent her days observing their way of life, a beautiful, symbiotic relationship with the jungle. She learned their rhythms, their reverence for nature, their intricate communal bonds. The elder woman, whose name was Aya, became her silent mentor, communicating through gestures and patient smiles, teaching Alara about the jungle's secrets from a perspective she, as a botanist, had only ever studied scientifically. Alara, in turn, tried to share her own story, sketching maps in the dirt, pointing to the sky, hoping to convey the concept of her home beyond the green. The Kawanui understood her need to return, a shared human desire for one's own people. They promised to help. After a week, with her strength fully restored and a profound gratitude in her heart, Aya led Alara to a different section of the river. There, a larger, more robust canoe awaited, manned by two strong Kawanui men. They had prepared provisions for her journey, a testament to their unwavering hospitality. With a heavy heart, Alara bid farewell to Aya, embracing her in a gesture of deep respect and affection. The parting was bittersweet. She was eager to return to her world, but she would forever carry a piece of this hidden one in her soul. She would remember the laughter of the children, the wisdom of Aya, the silent watch of the golden cat, and the profound generosity of a people who had every reason to fear an outsider, yet chose compassion. The canoe journey was swift, guided by the expert Kawanui navigators. They paddled downstream, past landmarks Alara vaguely recognized from her own raft journey, but now seen through the eyes of those who truly knew the river. After 2 days of steady progress, they reached a point where the jungle began to thin, and the faint, unmistakable sound of an outboard motor reached their ears. It was a small motorized cargo boat, chugging slowly upstream, its presence a jarring yet welcome sign of the outside world. The Kawanui men hailed the boat, their voices carrying across the water. The boat turned, and Alara's heart pounded. Her journey, her odyssey, was finally truly coming to an end. The Kawanui had guided her not just out of the green, but back to herself, forever changed by the profound lessons of survival and hope. The transition back to civilization was a shock to Alara's system, a jarring shift from the raw, elemental world of the jungle to the cacophony of human society. The small cargo boat carried her to the nearest riverside town, a bustling hub of noise, smells, and countless faces. The sheer volume of people, the artificial lights, the endless stream of information, it all felt overwhelming after weeks of profound solitude. Her first call was to her family, a tearful, joyous reunion over a crackling satellite phone, followed by the logistical nightmare of explaining her survival to incredulous authorities. Within days, she was back in her home city, embraced by her distraught but overjoyed parents, her colleagues, and friends. The comfort of a soft bed, a hot shower, and a full meal was immense, yet also strangely unsettling. The jungle had stripped away the superficial, leaving her with a profound appreciation for the simple necessities and a deep discomfort with excess. She found herself craving the quiet hum of the forest, the taste of wild fruit, the feeling of damp earth beneath her feet. The city, once her familiar haven, now felt alien, its concrete and steel a stark contrast to the living green she had come to know. Her experience became a phenomenon. The botanist lost in the green became a headline, her story a tale of incredible survival against impossible odds. She gave interviews, recounted her ordeal, but always felt that the true essence of her journey, the profound internal transformation, was impossible to convey in words. The fear, the despair, the moments of wonder, the silent communication with the golden cat, the wisdom of Aya and the Koanui, these were things that resided deep within her, a new, indelible part of her being. She was no longer just Alara Vance, the botanist. She was Alara Vance, the survivor, the explorer of forgotten paths, the student of an ancient wisdom. The jungle had been her greatest teacher. It had taught her resilience, resourcefulness, and the interconnectedness of all life. It had shown her the fragile beauty of existence and the immense power of the human spirit. She returned to her research, but with a renewed purpose, a deeper understanding of the ecosystems she studied, and a fierce determination to protect the wild places of the world. She maintained contact with the Ko'anui through intermediaries, ensuring their continued well-being and advocating for their rights. Her journey, lost in the green, was not just a tale of survival, it was a rebirth. It was a testament to the enduring power of hope, the unexpected kindness of strangers, and the profound, life-altering lessons found when one dares to step into the unknown. Alara had found her way back, but she had brought a piece of the green with her, forever changed, forever connected to the wild heart of the world.